everyone, and welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. My name is Chooks, and with me in the house today is Associate Professor Ann Rogerson from the University of Wollongong. And Ann, shall we meet you? Give us a little bit about your background, what you do, and your research focus.
Hi, Chuck. Hi, everyone. So my role at the University of Wollongong, I'm an Associate Dean of Education for the Faculty of Business and Law, so teaching and learning is my game. But my research back in 2009 ended up in the academic integrity space. So my doctorate is not in that area, but it's just one of those things that evolved, and I found a community of practice and was really excited and encouraged, and so it's actually become my key research area. So investigating academic misconduct, but in particular patterns of behaviour and detection of contract cheating.
Excellent. And that actually brings us to the topic we're looking at today. Today we're looking at investigating contract cheating and academic integrity cases. But before we get into that, I thought we'd just throw this question out there. There's a school of thought that says plagiarism is the same thing as academic contract cheating. So I thought I'd ask that question today: is how do you distinguish contract cheating from plagiarism?
So plagiarism tends to be a self or an individual pursuit. So someone submitting something is copying and pasting from a source and not acknowledging it or not paraphrasing it properly. Whereas contract cheating involves some other party. So it could be a family member, a friend, a colleague. It can be purchased, but it doesn't necessarily have to be purchased. It could be traded, shared, borrowed, either legally or illegally. So usually with contract cheating, there is some other party involved. It's not just the person themselves. So contract, by its implication, is getting some other person's involvement. There is some sort of arrangement or exchange. Whereas plagiarism or cut and paste plagiarism tends to be an individual pursuit.
Thanks for helping us distinguish between two of them. I was also curious to understand, is contract cheating prevalent since our sudden pivot to remote and hybrid learning? And what are universities or institutions of higher learning doing to manage this challenge?
Well, for some, the switch to online learning or remote learning hasn't really made a change. I think the biggest change has been where exams are final assessment tasks. So for myself and the subjects I used to teach, I haven't had exams in subjects for a number of years. And so it was an externally prepared assignment, report, scaffolded assessment task. And so the nature of that hasn't changed. If I'm asking a student to write something at home, even if they're coming to class, the nature of that hasn't really changed at all. But what has changed is the shift from some assessment tasks to be on-campus examinations to an alternate form of assessment. So that's where you're seeing fewer exams, or where there are exams, they might be timed, some might have online invigilation. That's one of the key things I've seen change. But the shift I've noticed is the type of cheating that takes place has had a bit of a shift with it to a lot more collusion, people working together to try and circumvent academic practice.
Okay, so that means it's still on the same level of challenge for universities, and still the same things are still being done to deal with that challenge. Yes.
A lot of the problems are not new, but there are new variants on some of the existing problems. So in the European Network for Academic Integrity conference that took place in June, that was one of the themes of discussion about what sort of variants had changed in the way that people were cheating. And as I just mentioned before, collusion has really increased, where students are using alternate platforms to communicate during an exam, even during lockdowns. So they're using their other social media networks, gaming platforms, or other chat functions to actually share information and thereby have some form of contract cheating.
Excellent. So that brings me to the next question, knowing that collusion now is a new form of contract cheating. For academics who might be watching this, they might be wondering, how do I go about investigating contract cheating? Let's look at the collusion context. How would what are the signs of contract cheating in that context?
Okay, well, and this is where Turnitin comes in very handy, is if you've got online assessments, even if they're timed, where you're getting answers that are identical to quite complex questions, there is a high level of similarity between the answers. And so that is a trigger for actually digging a bit deeper to find out what's going on. And so there are levels of match that are inconsistent, but then there are levels of match that are exactly the same. And when you notice it in a couple of submissions, even in a large class, it becomes fairly obvious that this is not normal and warrants some further investigation. So that's been the way that we've detected a number of cases of collusion. There have been others where some honest students have been very concerned about behaviours they knew that were happening and got in touch with lecturers, or we've got an anonymous line at the university where they could actually say that they had concerns about the actions of some students. And we also know from experience, particularly in numbers-based subjects, which affects disciplines like accounting, engineering, chemistry and things, that there are online services that are offering to answer questions during the course of an exam. So that's a different sort of form of collusion, where it mightn't be between students, but it actually might be with an external provider, saying, pay me and I'll throw the question to me and I'll answer it for you. So again, it's noticing things like errors where students have got an incorrect answer and the incorrect elements are exactly the same to a point that it's so close. There is no other way someone could have replicated that mistake.
Oh wow! Now that I think the game field is changing very much, and we've got to get better at it. So now, looking at the aspect of investigation, we know the process is quite tricky for most academics. So, and I know this is your area of expertise. Is how would you coach an academic who doesn't have any experience in terms of gathering evidence and ensuring that first stage of ensuring or the first stage of the academic misconduct process is done correctly?
Okay, so it's in academia, we're doing evidence-based practice, and this is about gathering evidence again. But the first thing I would say to people starting out in this space is understand your discipline norms. What do you normally expect to see as a response for a particular assessment task? And then when you find things outside that norm, that's when you have to start asking questions. So understanding the norms, if there are differences in language expression, if there are differences in calculation, presentation, understand those norms so that when you find something that falls outside the norm, you start investigating, you start asking questions. And so there are some very good resources on the TEXA, the Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency for Australia. And one of them is a tool that's been developed off something I did, which is an interview support thing. But I find that when you're grading a paper, you need to make notes while you're grading it, particularly if you've got large classes. Trying to make notes in a book or something like that as you're going through are very difficult to go back to. So what I developed was a template which has been expanded and adapted, and it means that you can make a note while you're actually going through the grading process. So you note down the things that are irregular, and I actually have a list of the sort of irregularities that you would find. But it means you can grade the paper and pop it to the side and then go back and compare all those irregularities. because sometimes the irregularities that appear in assessment tasks are our fault because we didn't write the question properly or we didn't make the instruction clear. So by being able to understand the norms and then investigating or looking through the irregularities, you can make a determination as to whether the irregularity is related or needs to be investigated down the academic integrity line, or whether it's something I need to redevelop my questions, my tools, my materials that support students. So it's not always the student's fault. Sometimes it's our fault. And so it's learning how to do that. And I can provide you some links to some papers that talk through some of those issues.
Excellent. I think that'll be good for anyone watching to have access to, so that they can navigate the space of gathering that level of evidence. Another challenge we know is actually engaging students in the investigation process. What's your experience with this, and what would you be looking out for towards a successful academic misconduct hearing?
Okay, I'm very much into honesty. If someone is honest about what they've done, I want to try and understand why they did what they did, because the literature will show this as well, that sometimes students will cheat when they feel they're backed into a corner, they've got a real life crisis, they might not be aware of the support mechanisms that the institution has. So it's understanding how the misconduct took place or what prompted the person to do it, because it's about learning outcomes. It's about, if someone's got a personal problem, it's about giving them the support, but also then showing that the institution has policies. If they have a personal life circumstance that might mean it's difficult to meet an assessment deadline, there are mechanisms to support them, to give them more time. It doesn't mean you have to cheat. So it's about a very much an educative approach. For any misconduct cases that we identify, I developed with a team here at the university an intervention program. So anyone who even has a low level of academic misconduct, such as poor academic practice, they actually have to go through this deeper intervention module. And what it's actually demonstrated is we have a very low level of recurrence once they've gone through that intervention module. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing is having conversations about it. People tend to avoid talking about academic misconduct. And in the classes I teach, I'm very, very open about it. I look at it as an educative thing. I also discuss the ethical implications of it, which is we wouldn't like to go over a bridge designed by someone who cheated their way through an engineering degree. I wouldn't like to be treated by a doctor who cheated their way through a medical degree. I don't want my finances done by someone who's cheated their way through an accounting degree. So it's about those things. And when you start explaining it in their terms, and it's like you have to do your part too. Education's such a privilege, but in so many cases people are looking at it at the end, I just want the piece of paper, and it's not about that, it's about the learning. And if you're paying for the degree, make the most of the opportunity, because it will help you when you end up in the workplace.
I think that's actually a very valid point there in terms of creating a culture of academic integrity. So when they know during the studies why this is important, I actually love your analogy of the bridge and accountant. When they know that, they're able to do better so that they can succeed. I think it's a tip I'll take on board. I really like that tip. Now we're looking at the aspect of technology, and we know we're moving towards a very technology-focused world. So what role might technology have in supporting that culture of academic integrity for universities or institutions of higher learning?
Technology's got a big role to play, but one of the other things that's come out of the past 18 months and the COVID situation is we need to be clear on the way we explain how technology is used. And I'll give an example. Is that a term that we quite often use on campus for examinations is an open book examination, which indicates to a student what materials they can bring into an examination room to use as source material. But when you put an assessment online, the definition of open book needs to change. It's almost like open system. So you have to actually re-educate people as to what is and is not appropriate to use. This is about developing judgment skills. And so if people jump straight onto Google and go for the first hit, that's not judgment. That's just going for the highest rated thing, which we know can be manipulated by how much someone pays. So it's about educating students how to use the right resources, how to develop discernment skills, judgment skills as to the use of resources, appropriate technology, and sourcing materials. So some of it's the same and some of it's explaining it in a different way. But if you can design an assessment where students have to stipulate what internet resources they use and why they chose those particular resources, then you can actually start evaluating their judgment skills. So I think that's going to be one of the shifts we see or need to see in assessment tasks, that there are not only reflective components on what people have learned, but also reflective components on what resources they've used and why they've selected them to determine if they're appropriate or not.
Oh, wow. I think that actually brings me to something we're trialing over the past few years is involving students in curating resources. And what that would look like is, for this semester, students share the resources they've used during the course of learning, and in the next semester, an academic could choose to share those resources in their. I think that's a really that's the co-design aspect of learning design, which is really good to point out. Looking at assessments, and you mentioned the open book to open system. What's one tip you can share for academics who are watching this that they might take into consideration to ensure the integrity of the assessments?
Okay, well, in addition to doing things like explaining what resources you've used and how you've used them, one of the other things I'd say is putting in a level of currency, if you can. So my standard discipline area is actually management and leadership, organisational behaviour. And so in setting assignment tasks, I would be asking students to apply something to a current circumstance. So it could be something, a government decision around employment. It could be, say, a COVID-related finance benefit package. Because that level of currency, it won't eliminate contract cheating, but it makes it very obvious. Because in my experience, I've found that the contract cheating companies or people sharing resources do not have that level of finesse. They don't have that level of currency. So as I said, you're not going to eliminate it, but you're certainly going to make it very, very obvious when that hasn't happened. And that's been my experience since I've introduced that type of material to assessment questions. So that would be a big recommendation. Okay.
I think you've already alluded to this when you talked about starting a culture of academic integrity at the beginning of the course and the class. But are there any other ways we can imbibe a culture of academic integrity for students who are beginning a course, just to ensure that they have the right values that prepare them for to become citizens of integrity, like we like to call it at Turnitin?
I think one of the things we need to be aware of is that students will bring their previous norms about academic integrity from where they've studied last. So their expectation will be is what they had to do in high school will apply in university or college, and that's not necessarily the case. And what we're finding, and this is one of the things that's come through recently and we're exploring in a bigger way, is that despite our best things with preparatory courses or introductory courses or transition courses, that students will still refer back to the norms from their previous study experience. And it's not till they've actually submitted their first assignment at that level that you can actually explore it a bit further. So yes, still talk about it in the first weeks of session, but it needs a deeper discussion after that first assessment task has happened to actually put the, say, university requirements in context, because they can't naturally make that transition or that understanding about how things are slightly different. And that's something that's really coming out now. So intervention programs are great, preparatory programs are great, discussions are great, but until you actually have that reference point to refer back to, it doesn't really seem to make sense for people.
Excellent. That reference point, that's one of my key takeaways there. It's just having that reference point so that they can go back to it and do the same thing over and over again. Just so that we wrap this conversation with regards to investigating contract cheating, have you got any other thoughts on the topic and how we might begin to inform a change in academic integrity policies with universities or institutions of higher learning?
I think it's recognised that policies are necessary, but as anybody who's worked in a large organisation, and universities are no different, there are lots of policies. And number one, you don't really understand policy until you have to use it. So get your academic integrity policy and actually work through it to get a better understanding. So reading it is one thing, but actually applying it is a different issue altogether. That's one thing. But also too, very much an advocate of something that Kath Ellis from University of New South Wales says, which is make it someone's job. And I think for academics, we need to be aware of it. We need to be able to identify and refer it. But for someone to actually explore it in detail and manage it properly, someone needs to be dedicated to the task, or it needs to be a considerable chunk of someone's time to be able to do it properly, because trying to put it on top of all the other demands that fall on the academic workload, in particular seeing these pivots to remote delivery, which has required redesign of course materials, of assessment tasks and things. And we're aware that, say first year of university, some of our colleagues are managing student bodies of 500, 900, 1,000. They're big numbers. So we need to be cognizant of how much time it actually takes to do it properly. Yes, it becomes quicker with practice, and that's where I can look at things now and pick them up much easier. But that's after like 13 years looking at this stuff. So practice does help, but making someone's job, I think, is something that institutions really have to look at.
Excellent. And I remember that Kat did mention that. She said, make it someone's job at the Accelerate conference, or seminar rather. So I want to say a big thank you to Associate Professor Ann Rogerson again for being part of today's Integrity Matters by Turnitin. We're really appreciative of what you've shared with regards to investigating contract cheating and academic integrity cases. Thank you.
Thank you.